On the 30th of December 2013, 55-year-old grandmother Valerie Graves was found dead in her bed by her sister. It was just 5 days after her birthday. She had suffered severe head injuries. No one has ever been charged with her murder. When Valerie Graves was murdered here in this house behind me, people simply couldn't believe it. This is Smugglers Lane, a little back road to the coast down here. We're about 1.5 miles from the centre of Bossum, and it's clear that if you were going to commit a crime here, you would really have to know the area. The house where these tragic events took place didn't belong to Valerie or any member of her family. She'd been asked by the owner to house-sit the property over Christmas, and the fact that she could do so with her mother and other relatives and enjoy the house owned by the Chamberlain family and the environs of Bossum was something Valerie had been looking forward to. Valerie arrived here with her mother in the days before Christmas. She was joined by Jan, her sister, and Jan's partner, Nigel Akers. They had plenty of fresh walks and long dinners, and by all accounts, had an affable and very relaxed time.
The house where the murder happened belonged to a friend of Valerie's brother-in-law.
There was a feeling of her enjoying the largesse of her friends, the Chamberlains, who had gone to Costa Rica with their twins on holiday.
Valerie's 55th birthday also was during the Christmas period, so it was a birthday and Christmas and New Year celebration with a family and sitting around the fire, watching Christmas TV. Very pleasant way to spend the holiday.
But on the night of the 29th of December, all that changed. The evening appears to have been much like the previous nights they had spent. The group had dinner, not too much to drink, a glass of wine or two, and then at about 10 o'clock, Valerie retired to bed.
Valerie was there, obviously. Her mother, Eileen, was there, and her sister, Janie, was there. The other person who was there was Janie's husband, Nigel Akers, a 66-year-old architect. Now, his house in Surrey, he bought from the Chamberlains, so there are all these sort of intricate connections between the different members of the circle, very close-knit.
To say it was a normal night is something of a cliché in circumstances like this, but on that night it actually was.
She was sleeping in the downstairs room, and as far as anyone knew, there was nothing on her mind. There'd been no phone communications to upset her. There'd been no texts. There'd been nothing at all which transpired which would make anyone think, oh, she's upset, somebody's trying to contact her, something's going on. There was nothing like that.
Some of the key details of what happened that night are still unclear. The reason being is that none of the other occupants in the house heard anything during the attack. We do know that her assailant gained access to Valerie's bedroom sometime during the night. As to whether she disturbed him or was confronted by her killer or indeed was murdered in her sleep, we still don't know.
Well, this is the great mystery, and the police have spent an awful lot of time trying to unravel what exactly happened, how the perpetrator gained entry so quietly as to not wake anyone else up in the property.
After the attack on Valerie, the killer then apparently left the house and made his or her escape. What we do know is that our killer unleashed a brutal assault on her with a claw hammer, causing fatal injuries to her head. She never stood a chance.
Somebody very, very quietly must have come into the room and for, again, unknown reasons, just unleashed an appallingly violent, sustained attack. She had absolutely no chance to defend herself. The blows rained down very quickly. So it was a really shocking murder and an appalling crime. A completely defenseless lady in bed, asleep.
So if we accept that the attack wasn't premeditated, was the robbery planned? The house is a long way off the beaten track, and it seems to me that you would really need to know where you're going if you wanted to get to or away from here. At some stage that night, the killer had to leave the scene. They were bloody, dripping in the aftermath of a frenzied murder. Where did they go and how did they leave the crime scene? Still, we don't know.
There was some suggestion that a boat may have been used at one point because you could very quietly row across, moor the boat nearby, then walk up. But I don't think that it is particularly clear how they gained entry. As far as we know, the house was locked by the other members of the family.
There's nothing to suggest Valerie was having difficulties in her private life in the days and hours leading up to the crime. However, the police did find something they could link to the murder, and it led to an extraordinary suspect elimination process.
The police searched the area extremely thoroughly, and some weeks afterwards they found what they now are convinced is the murder weapon, a 16-ounce claw hammer, quite an old one. The area that it was found in was flooded at the time. There were floodwaters in the area. The killer appeared to have thrown it into some water in a local lane, perhaps believing that it would stay underwater.
And it also had some unidentified DNA on it. Now, this was a major development for the officers who'd had quite a time looking into the background and whatever. And so the next step was, of course, to try and identify the DNA, because that would 9 times out of 10 lead you directly to the killer.
They were able to establish that it was the murder weapon because they could get a trace of Valerie's DNA from it. They also were able to get a partial DNA sample of the killer, or the person they believe was the killer. And that really is the best clue that they have. It's not a full sample, so they can't compare it with the National DNA Database, but it's sufficient that they can use it to eliminate suspects.
That instigated the largest ever DNA screening campaign in the history of the Sussex Police.
They put boards up in the street and asked men to go to a particular centre.
What strikes me is that burglars don't generally set out to engage in a confrontation. I think it's unusual that someone seeking to rob a house with the minimum of difficulty would be carrying such a weapon. To date, over 2,000 men have been screened and all have been eliminated as suspects in the murder. Despite this, local detectives still hold out some hope that something will emerge from this continuing process.
How are you going to track down everyone who has worked in that area over that period? I think that's a much tougher ask, but it's worth doing, because if it is somebody who lives locally, then you would imagine eventually they will manage to smoke them out.
It's possible some people haven't come forward to give a DNA, but I think that's unlikely in the local community. And they will be looking for transient people coming to and from, delivery men perhaps, other people who knew the geography, who knew the layout, and they will be going down that path. But they may be reaching the conclusion where the DNA could have come from someone far, far afield.
If so, what was he doing in Bossum? And why was he targeting this specific house? It's something I'm finding it difficult to understand, but it appears that all was not quite what it seemed in the place Valerie Graves was murdered. In the weeks that followed, however, police discovered something about the house where Valerie was murdered, which raises some more questions about the circumstances surrounding her death and activities linked to where it happened. It transpires that the house was placed on a sex website where it was advertised as a rendezvous point for swingers and those interested in casual sex. The man who posted the ad described himself as the director of fun and pleasuring and said he was interested in blindfolds, group sex and bondage. Jake Wallace-Simmons was one of the first journalists on the scene and one of the first to discover this extraordinary connection between the house and adult websites.
Went back to the office, began to Google and dig into the different people who were involved in the case, and lo and behold, the owner, Malcolm Chamberlain, the owner of the property, appeared on swingers' websites, and a couple of entries on sex websites.
There were naked pictures of him on this website advertising that property as a venue for casual sex. Now, We contacted the owner's solicitor. He was abroad at the time, but his solicitor said that they were very old photographs. He had no idea how they had got onto this website. He certainly wasn't a user of this website. And when we asked if somebody was making mischief, the solicitor said, well, we can't really think of any other reason for them to be there. So it appeared that somebody could have had a grudge against the owner of the property in some way.
While it all seems a bit bizarre and the sort of story that generally becomes tabloid fodder, it really is interesting that a house is burgled in a remote location and an innocent woman is murdered, and then these revelations emerge. So what was going on in this house, and did it have anything to do with Valerie's murder?